Alright, that the Yuki di Gorma Dustin Shutare. Then that in my shady Yevotia, that Dustin Yusum that Dimbiton, some Tamina, and parent in his your reset tissue actually. Parent.
So this morning then, we concluded we looked at the 8 causes that lead to these excellent, fully ripened results. And these fully ripened results, through having them, one is able to accrue far more merit than one otherwise would be able to.
That the negating answer that you say, sugar, Shuba, Diana, you give what the other, you assume that then between the Chabana, Nemin, Netebo, Pulucho, young grace, as you had Delia, you give what the, you assume that then number member Pulujo, euros, and you assume la, and Semjen Namboda, Semjen number Dabala, Rangla. Round the Deba, because the same number daba, so the same number daba, chiche, same number daba, chiche, and then chick the Joan daba, then a shing daba, said the sum did Samba number, same number daba, chiche, Joa daba, shing dabas, the sum tones, and Yamacheva, and the negate the cutie and the Pulujuane, Yahweh, never chair to research. Nangi chasa loya ma de gyusum de denpa ne number member pulu chungwa euro gyusum la se de gyusum de kare lamna da ne de dangbo di sheshar de same number taba and jo number taba shin number taba se sum di che ore che sum se de.
Starting again with the text, the very top of page 141. If those 8 causes, so that's what we looked at this morning, are conjoined with 3 conditions, their fully ripened effects will be outstanding. So now we come to a presentation of these 3 conditions, and we see the first is pure attitude, the second is pure application or performance, and the third is pure field. Both the first 2 have the divisions relating to oneself and to others.
Da gyusaya di, da dorduna, ane lunga isu nye chutimbe tsurim sunya da, jimbe nyamle chaya, sube nyamle chaya digi ridwa, odus nyamle chaya digi. Dinige nyamle gewa saba digi inayam, da jiga gyusum da tenpa cheba na yakbu yunguru yasaya di karsuna, dini, jugi, da ngowa cheba ina, semjaya tamji gyuduna ngowa cheba ina, dinige gewa diya, semjaya tamji gyuduna ngowa cheba ina, dini, ane semjaya sanji gowa tubi gyuru ngowa ina, dinige gyudi gewa dida, gewa pulu chunga chagorwa, dina dine sungorwa.
Just to re-establish the context. So this morning we looked at the 8 causes we looked at the causes that are required for these 8 fully ripened effects. And those causes, just to summarize them in brief, would be ethical restraint, generosity, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, humility, and some others such as rejoicing. And then when one accumulates these causes, one should also dedicate this merit so that when one experiences the ripening result, one utilizes this excellent state to be of great benefit to others. So one needs to accumulate the causes and then dedicate the merit so that one will utilize these ripening results to be of tremendous benefit to others.
That is the same number of same number of last. Da rang la deba ni da rang la deba ni shan la deba ni se si sung do ni yong go res rang la deba ni rang la deba ni de kares ne yu du be ge wa nam la me jang chu do ngo wa ni number member la mi je wa wo sa dang bo de je sa da.
Now continuing, there are two kinds of pure attitude. Pure attitude related to oneself and pure attitude related to others. Each of these is 2 aspects. So looking at the first, the pure attitude related to oneself. The two aspects of pure attitude related to oneself are, firstly, to dedicate the virtues, the causes, to unsurpassed enlightenment without hoping for their maturation in samsara.
Isada denigi YouTuber ni YouTube kewa nam sire deshi ma juge nemi YouTube ya ge ju kewa ti Thubten ti kewa ti ge so. An deso da group channel nan a je lame jang shu do ngo wa ni. Da semja tamje ge do sanje go bon to gyu wa sho se no wa ja wo re so re. Ngo wa ni number tamje mi ro number nemi le mi ro wa wo si de. Jesa denigi kewa group je 개와디 옹아 개와 치마 nga digi tembarsho dewi tembarsho ngara 개와 약벌 lembarsho nga neji 대시 셰 nembi 나신다 수부 dewo 용야다 체rinwo 용야다 안내지 변조 약보 용야다 내나 sambayo 용화 쇼스네 디네 제베네 nemile rewa chagoro rewa 수세 rewa 마오바나 소수기 소술이야 용야게 rewa nga digi 용야다 nga 체rinwo 용야 nga 변조야 삼다 두시는 거와 제베나 다디 뉴바 개와디 라든 지부 대안의 세치미기 디게 잠려야 레와치네 두고여 봐서 디 리자와 개와나 디 개와마도 충충만 책임 말했어 제산 디 내민 디니기 용야를 레와 개교 말했어 디니기 레와 마게 봐자 나 가른 거 버스네 디니기 개와디게 차서 샘전 탐제레 판도 주고도 제자 샘전 탐제레 판도 주발라 판도 주바 초도 유바디 다 상예리샤 제상의 샘전 탐제기도도 개와딜레디네 샘전 탐제 상교고바 토벌 토비 규규와 쇼스 ngwa wa le ji ta don ta nan su ki ta ngwa ja de song duwa.
So look at this first part in relation to the pure attitude related to oneself, and just to say the words at the end there in samsara, this is the written translator added it just for clarity, it's not in the Tibetan, but the meaning is fine. So what it comes down to is that one's motivation by which one accumulates the causes mentioned, as well as one's motivation in terms of one's dedication, is not so that one experiences excellent ripening results for oneself in one's future life. One is not engaging in these accumulations of virtuous causes so that in one's next life one can have a long and healthy life, that one can have material abundance, and that one can have influence over others. This is not the motivation with which one should be engaging in the accumulation of these causes, nor dedicating the merit. Because if one does so, all one is really hoping for is overcoming some kind of temporary problems and attaining some temporary pleasures. This is not the motivation of the Dharma. So the motivation, the dedication should be, through my ongoing spiritual development, may I be of greatest benefit to others. May I ease their suffering both in a mundane or ordinary manner, but in particular, may I ease their suffering by guiding them how to attain their own enlightenment. So for this purpose, I accrue this merit and I dedicate it. I dedicate it to the attainment of Buddhahood for all.
이사도나라 인간적인 되네 개와 줍제 개와 등와 개비가라 나 개와 치마 세진 보용와 저 대기대 템바셔 농주 첨보용와 저 원 첨보 교와셔스 되네 몰람 개바이나 지난 디고레 디고르 마디바스카야 말와 이나야 아니 개와디 니 개와 되네기 개와디다 개와 치마 좀 되네기 주비야자 마도 빼 저게 누가 첨보도 차고 말해 탈바다 탐지김벼 고반투비 규차고 말이스 되네 현자다 심전 탐지기 된다라 섬다지 상지 고만 투비주 규르고 와이나 다 개와베 제 풀루 침바 델레 근데 개와데 또 쳐와면 봐 차고래 풀루 중한테 차고래 되네 제바이나 심전 탐지 상여도 규르고 와이나 되네 개와디기 개와 치마 안에 체링보 용하다 용거래 분좀도 가서 롱주 첨보대요 용거라 옹아 첨보대요 용구어래 이 용거래 근데 마시안데 상지 고만 투비 규르 뭐한자 디규야 차고래 제사다 되네게 삼다지 뭐하게베나 유풀로 추마선다 유디베네 그래서 나 상지 고바도 규차고래 해서 올다다 나디 송으로와 디랑을 떼바세데 랑기 제오로와 랑기 개와선 랑기 뭐와 자고서 랑을 떼바세데 지소래
So the sub-outline we're looking at is pure attitude related to oneself. So this expression oneself here means in relation to the merit that I accumulate, this is how I am going to dedicate it. So the attitude with which one dedicates the merit one oneself has accumulated. So just to say, it's not that it is wrong to dedicate your merit to having a long life, good health, material abundance, prestige, and so forth. It's not that that's wrong, but rather that is not in accordance with the motivation that we have cultivated. It's not in accordance with our understanding of a precious human rebirth's particular potential. So we should rather be accruing virtue and dedicating it in accordance with what we have come to understand is a meaningful life, fulfilling the very potential of this life. So therefore, one dedicates to Buddhahood for all beings. And in this dedication, that is the explicit intent, and that is how it will eventually ripen. But there will be side effects of this dedication, this accumulation of merit under this motivation and its dedication. There will be side effects, such as having a long life, being healthy, being born into a prestigious family, being physically attractive, and so forth. So these will be desired side effects, but because of one's dedication, the merit will not be exhausted merely from that result, but will continue to help in one's attainment of Buddhahood. Then the second aspect relating to oneself, to accomplish these causes from the depths of one's heart with earnest sincerity.
금센 통화진 나디 빼야고래 디 맞은데 탑면도 선배 샘딩기 아니지 디 냠는 제일이야 듬버슈 잡고 제제 아니 죽고 그래서죠 대장 군노 차기도 하도 군노 되니게 겨워 주변이야 듬버슈 잡고 진에 빼다 금센 통화 슈 잡고 디 맞은 말은 귀디 말은 탑면도 제고도 선배 슈 잡고 통지에 되니게 주바이나 아니 귀디 군노 슈 잡고 대야다 대용으로다 대야 심제 탐지교도는 산요고 토비 치도 인습에 군노 되니게 삼다제 군노들이야 되니게 귀디 주변을 군노 아니 심제 탐지 산요고 토비 치로 삼다디네 배지 듬버 잡고네 슈 침부고네 도시 주바이나 아니 개와데 군노도 안에 개와데 슈 쳐야잖아 아니 대디디 녀르셔야데 되네 개와 죽차네 되는 바 아니 지게 모아지네 야 슈 뉴버처 다이다 되니게 노스체네 제도하다 간절한 랑기 규디 개와디 마루냐로 군노들이 규디기 빼 군노 듬바 가신 저신 때에 냠는체 듬바 슈잡고 제디야네 심제 탐지교도는 제 삼다 도시는 주바이나 아니 군노가 되네 개와디 개침부 차기를 해서.
The second point, as it says, to accomplish these causes, so it's pointing to the motivation. Yep. One shouldn't merely engage in virtue because it's what you've been told to do or what you've come to intellectually understand that you should do, but one should cultivate a motivation that is especially sincere and that is intense. So in this way, one's accumulation of causes, because of the power of that motivation, will be extensive. So one will engage in the same ethical or generous or patient act, but the merit that one accrues from that will be greatly amplified because of the quality of one's motivation, that one is doing so. One is, for example, being of benefit to others or refraining from harming others from the depths of one's heart. This is something one truly believes in and is doing so with full sincerity. In this way, extensive merit will be accumulated.
아디 랑라 되바 가선데 랑게 군노 랑게 겨어도 랑게 군노 되네 삼다 타르 겨어도 세제라 아니 모아도 시고래서 나 현라 되바 세디 나디시도와 최 튠바 랍딩 타숨 토나 차도 전심 전세 녀바 바네 제수이랑 시고래서 제수이랑 대다 따르 마누야 니네 신 제제 레마도 또 봐오스.
So where we see pure attitude related to oneself, this refers to one's own motivation, one's own activity, and one's dedication. So this is the meaning of related to oneself. Now pure attitude related to others. The two aspects of pure attitude related to others are to give up jealousy, rivalry, and contempt when you see others practicing the Dharma at a higher, equal, or lower level than yourself, and to instead rejoice. And even if you're not capable of that, to think of it many times a day as the ideal way to act.
Angele che tumba si de rangi nyamlen cheba na si mi shenje nyamlen cheba tona si che tumba si rangi nyamlen cheba gewa tuba na shanda ge gewa tuba tomba ina jisada shengi gewa tuba de la kashe gi mi be maseke ben de jam nyu je chanshu sim la so kom je ani nyamlen che tu ga yung go de sanji ko ba tobe che nyamlen che de ge da rap chawra ya ho 첨부 잡티처라 다징 안는 년도에다 저주세 가서 탈비고 바토비 쳐도 안는 년내제다 원료고 바토비 신년내 제바이네 예전에 징로셔 단 타마세데 교쇼로 셈 다제 수수기 되게 제와치마 안지 라다미고 바토야레 수수라랑기 디베샤야다 되게 섬단에 개와줘야 되게다 개와 충충으로 됐 랍팅이 타솜세야디 개와딜라 랍다 징다 타마세데 다 간에시여베네 미 donala tinigi gewa dukan ganis tombeine desulya chado chikyo mares chado dan jansim chikyo mares dan be ani yang ji niejuji na kyo dinema da jingmin kyo dinema ji du minasa niejuji chikyo mares on jesin du maje baje be yagore sembege rabdrin chesum ganis ko gewanya be yagore a sembege kolya an jesu ira je gore ese.
So reading just the second half first of the sentence. When you see others practicing the Dharma at a higher, equal, or lower level than you, what this is referring to, so it should be expressed a little differently, is in relation to the motivation of one's fellow Dharma practitioners. If they have the supreme motivation of striving to develop bodhicitta, or if they have a middling motivation, in other words, they're striving for their own individual liberation, or if they have the initial level of motivation, which is striving for excellent rebirths, whatever level of motivation they have, do not, and you see them striving in virtue, do not be jealous towards them, do not be contemptuous towards them, do not have a attitude of competitiveness towards them. So this then is the meaning. So the terms higher, equal, or lower relate that to the three levels of motivation. And whatever virtuous activity a person is engaging in under the initial, intermediate, or supreme level of motivation, do not be either jealous of them or contemptuous towards them, or have a competitive attitude towards them.
대다다를 만유나 니레신 제절에 마도 또보고서 되네게다 통일될 남사 야 제수 일어나 되네게 차도 잔센 빠지바 제수 일어나 제에게 삼로 제수 일어나 제투 매베 있나야 아니 마두바나야 아니 니네야 어다 되네시 삼다제 제수 일어나 제고래서 배야네 야도 또보고서 야네야도 삼당고 그래서 제수 야네야 삼다베나 네게 디나 도신 마음반데 되네게 제수 일어나 제투야게 냠내 제투도 용구리에서.
So therefore, towards others, refrain from being jealous or contemptuous or competitive. Rather, rejoice in the good that others do. Yeah, the context is particularly towards the Dharma activity, but of course we would relate it to anyone. Rejoice in the good that they are doing. Particularly if one is coming from has a good attitude, valuing others, wanting them to be free from suffering and abide in happiness, then it's easy for a joyful attitude to arise when you see your fellow suffering beings striving in virtue. In this way, one comes to sincerely rejoice in the good that others are doing.
Jowa Daba said. Jowa Daba la Jowa Daba Tila, Rala Dubani, during Wada. Mount Toba was Shesa. Then Jesu Iran, Jema Tubine, some time Jesu Iran, Jegores and be Yana and the Lam Mount Toba, Yana and some Tangores. The Yellow Demi give Jesu Iran, Jegores, as you were. That they Dala Manuba and the Nias Jesu Miliban, Jeho Gimson, some Diana and some Daji, and it's a Toba was a Yana and the Gimson, some Jegores and some Jevana, and then Jesu Iran, Jitu at Yungre said, Shesarada. Love Sarva, love you.
And then it concludes with, even if you are not capable of that, to think of it many times a day as an ideal way to act. Because if one it's all too easy to be competitive and certainly contemptuous towards others. So this will take time to turn around, this attitude to turn around. So when you notice it within yourself, recognize this is not ideal and rather intentionally rejoice in the good deeds of others. And by doing so repeatedly, over time, one's natural inclination will be to rejoice in the virtue that others do. Then the second condition, pure application or performance. Pure application related to oneself consists in practicing virtue for a long time, continually and intensively.
Yunringbu Chegor Esor, that been Surim Soya sometime, and Yunringbu Surim Soya, and Sebenium Leja Yunringbu Jea, and Dusin Yunringbu Jada, and then Barma Cheba, and Cabreja, Cabreja, Maimaje, Muduchin, Dusin, they are and the shoe drop or position between the two Chegor Esad, Joa JB Cablet, and Yamlan JB Cablet Sungduan.
So application then is what application means, because it can also be translated as performance. So we are applying ourselves to the teachings we've received, or we are putting into action the teachings we've received. So the practices that have been presented will be those such as ethics, generosity, patience, and so forth. So this second condition relates to not the attitude, that was the first. This is when one is actually cultivating these minds, living under the influence of these minds. One should do so in a way that is for a long time, continuous and intensive. So in other words, one should develop a deep habituation, not be sporadic, not to do so without a strength of mind, but to rather do so over a long time, continually and intensively.
Yunam Juvan Shu Drop was said the Kunoro, just Yamlen Chidu Kunodil, that the Dubu and big dinner down to Lenji Bezu Champion Yamlen Chidu, Dumba Shu Drop, what you down Kunuana, some Jatamjik, some Taja, Dushine, and the Kuno Dinicine, Jewes, Kuno de Chagua. That the Joa said the new Gunia launch, giving Yamlen Chibi Kablia, Sarajini Shasa of my imbaje, Yuningbu, Duringbu Yane Yadu, Mudija Barmacha. Mudin Jewes, that Joe Yamlen Jeva de Jewes. That dinner Dangbodita, Yamlen Che Savage, Kewadi Moadi, Semja Tamjik, Sayokova to which the more as don't I did it.
Earlier in the chapter, when we were looking at the 10 non-virtues, we saw that practices have the 4 parts of the object, the intention, and the performance, and the completion. So we see some of this coming through here. So if we look at pure application related to oneself, and above a pure attitude related to oneself. So in terms of the attitude, so this there will be the quality of the virtuous motivation. And there we see one develops an earnest intensity from the depths of one's heart. And to the extent that one develops such a motivation, then when it comes to the performance or the application, then one will be able to naturally engage in these virtuous practices of ethics, generosity, and patience and so forth for a long time, continually and intensively, because it is that motivation that will lead to one doing so. Moreover, when the act is concluded, so the completion is there, and one comes to dedicate, one's dedication also will reflect the motivation and the performance in that one will dedicate with earnest sincerity, one will dedicate from the depths of one's heart.
용고르바 지다 담보 군로 되네 개변냠내 제 개변냠는 줍선진 타말로 오와자디 용고르바 돈다디 디숭 디인사레 디레샤 제자 디네자 도스치나 랑라 되바 랑라 되바 지서다 랑라 되바 랑기 제고르바 랑기 개변냠내 지 군로기 군로 군로 약보게 되네 군로 되바 지 군로 슈타보게 되네 지 개변냠내 디게 윤마셔 약보제 되네 제세베젤야 주들레 아니야 공고스 오와라게 오와잡 도시 도시에 랑기 제바세 但现在对吧是的但现在给我切吧的了结束一让切吧的现在啥吧的了的结束一让切给我啥的了现在对吧是这个多
In this presentation, this division into oneself and, maybe you could say towards oneself and towards others, means that towards oneself in terms of the attitude and application means one's own motivation one generates, the performance oneself does, and then the dedication or completion of the activity, and then the dedication that oneself does. So this is the meaning of this division into towards oneself, and then towards others is how we relate towards others.
먼저 민 조롱의 주심도 조화세의 군로 당보 조화 되는 거에도 이발이와 타마 뭐하게도 숨바차기로와 나도 조화세의 군로를 그거 말에 무엇이 자와 집에 내가 조화세의 자와 집에 내가 없어야 그거다 조화 다바세야 자와 집에 내가 냠는 집에 내가 없어야 당은 종어 주심지에도 무엇이 되는 거에도 그거 저 냠는 무엇이 되는 그거래
Often when we hear about a particular practice, we'll hear about not just the practice, but the motivation within which to do, and then we'll be guided in accordance with that motivation to dedicate in a particular way. So motivation, performance, and dedication. So in the first condition, that is the motivation. Here, the second condition is the performance, and the dedication, the dedication, the third step, is done in accordance with that initial motivation. So the performance is the actual practice.
되는 마송다디 당보디 오와세디 당보 차요도 타마디 당보로 차요도 되네 아니 닝타바네 윤한 주비 슈자바스도 군로를 차로도 당보 차요도 타마다 당보디 타마디 녀를 시되네 당보디 시 다 좋아스도 무시도 좋아 다바스 무시 냠네 제 니디 니바디 타마다 시도 송도 제자다 조롱의 죽숨세디 조화세 넘긴데 조롱의 죽숨나도 조화세 군로제 뭐에서도 냠내지 뭐시디제 타마몰람 죽죽 차기로와 나다데데 소요도 다데디 조화세디 뭐시디 냠내지 뭐시디 차로도와 죽디 가르데 타마 뭐세디 당보 소와디 이래도 균남 남순나 때문에 가서래 샘전 남나 랑라 되베게 균난 되베 개와나 라메 자시도 뭐와세디 타마디 차로 죽디 차로와 Then ning taban gyuna dribe shu jabo se dangbo de kunwa de dangbo la cha ru do ji se di ko gorim se ji dene re do song do de.
The way it's been presented here isn't in the usual order. The order is usually the order that one does something in: motivation, performance, dedication. But if we look up at the pure attitude related to oneself, the first point is dedication, so the third step. Then the second point is in relation to the motivation. The first point, so to dedicate the virtues, the causes to unsurpassed enlightenment. So it starts with dedication and then immediately goes actually back to motivation, to accomplish these causes from the depth of one's heart with earnest sincerity. So that's the motivation. Now we've come to the performance of pure application related to oneself. So, but understanding the sequence, that is the actual sequence in which one would perform.
Nadi shanla tuba joa jeba de la ta rangla tuba de shanla tuba rangi jeba de mudu ne jeba da gyuning bu che de che da shanla tuba da rangi giwe nyamle rangi che chik che mi shanla tuba si shanla jeju ya de su lo da che sa shanla tuba se de shanla tuba ni su lo joa de la rangla tuba de shanla tuba ni ro rangla tuba se de rangi che de giwe nyamle che rangi che de che cha ro che sa rangi che ka de se du ru bo gyuning bu che ho res ba ma che ba che ho res de di rangi che ba shu sa cha da shanla tuba se da so su ge giwe nyamle che ba ma de shanla ya giwe nyamle che ju ho res wo da da ngo ju so su le shanla giwe nyamle che ju ya de sung do shanla tuba ni yang da ba ma lang ba len du shu ba da lang ba nam gawa ki be chir nga ba che ba da gyu mi che ba je ba da mi do che ba was.
So we've looked then at pure application related to oneself, and this then, as well as above, to pure application, pure attitude related to oneself. So there we've seen the motivation, the performance, and the dedication in relation to oneself. Now to conclude with looking at in relation to others, pure application related to others. Pure application related to others consists in bringing those who are not correctly cultivating virtue to do so, and praising those who are cultivating virtue so that they take delight in it, causing them to continue without interruption and preventing them from abandoning it.
And Robachi, Gawa Tuchuba, down Malang Bala, Lang to Chupa, Lendo Chupa. So that Penang, the Mu Jimbe Yamnacharachi, Jemetemi, Jigana, other day and the Dusin Consulia, just Robachi to the Audua, and the Jawa says, Dusin Chanlia, Jimbatan Juada. Yaji Surim, or that Denegate, that's what you said that the Niji to imagine the Yahudatis and the Jim Ding and gone to the Bango to us and some Jews left, call you Jimbe Yamnan Jejuya. 수rim지 안에 냠는 제주야 안에 세베님 어다 미식견진 아데 되네 파 코로나 디지게만 렌저다 비육시 코스코 되네 세보금 되셔야지 루시는 그 세보금 줘야 디지사 야다바 말랑바 개와 냠는 제 마통은 될이야 안 렌도 슈바시도 콜이야 개윈 냠는 제주 꾸마 제제 개위기 당도 라바 루시는 이 제주바 될라 야다바 렌 슈바당 디스스고다 야다바 슈바다 세야 Lendo Shuba. Oh, Lendo Shuba, Yandaba, Malamba de Yeda, Malamba de, Dini Yamne giving Yamne Chimebana, call ya Lendo Shuba, Jimbetam and Jimbatan Juba, Surim Sun Juba, Sevakum Juba, and the Gabriela, Gora Georgia, and Chevo Puada, and the Negi Chubaina, that's Yanlia, Pandor, and Jikivigi, and then Jimbesam, the Chi, Chigi Chimba Chagro, Chigi Chimba Chagro, Odusin, Yamne Chichuba Sundua.
The first part here, pure application related to others consists in bringing those who are not correctly cultivating virtue to do so. So this then refers to the generosity of giving Dharma. So it may be something formal or it could be informal in how you talk to those you have a good relationship, those you have influence over, your friends and so forth. For example, by encouraging them to engage in generosity, maybe telling them about a donation you've made and how you feel so good about it, and implying they should do something similar, or maybe if they need help to help in helping someone, so being generous in terms of giving of themselves to help, then you will say, oh, I'll help you, and we can both help that person or that organization. In this way, encouraging them in virtue. And so too with ethics, talking about the importance to have a clear, determined attitude not to harm others, and the benefits of having such an attitude, of having that kind of impact on our world. So this and other illustrations also with patience, talking about what the meaning of patience is, how to be patient in adverse circumstances. So this is the generosity of giving Dharma, and it's encouraging others to engage in virtue.
Denegi nyamlen jihen gewa juken zulya ane konsulya semshu praya nan gawa kie zulya pe ya hure se ngawa chuba kyoran di ya pe ya hure kyoran gewa ya ba sare se de ngawa chuba ina ane korong semle gawa ki gurwa semle gawa ki yadu yane ya de chegi deba dumba shusheli gurwa jeza denegi pengu gurwa dene zada jeza langba nam ane gawa ki bi chir ngawa chuba as.
The first pure application related to others is to encourage or guide those who are not correctly cultivating virtue to do so. The second, praising those who are cultivating virtue so that they take delight in it. So where there are those who are engaging in virtue, stop, recognize that they are doing so, praise them, and thereby encourage them. Because by praising others who are engaging in virtue, if they are hesitant about doing so, perhaps they extending themselves beyond what's usually comfortable, you'll be giving them confidence, and thereby they're more likely to do so. Moreover, by you recognizing the virtuous activities that others are engaging in, you are showing that you value what they are doing. And this too will serve to encourage them to continue to engage in virtue and to turn what may be sporadic virtuous deeds into regular or consistent virtuous deeds.
Yun mi sheba che mutu ne che ju ya da ani mido wa se de ne ke ke nyamlen cha de ya zam ja ma ju ba che ko le mutu che yun kyong che tu ya le ya tabshi dang go le se da.
And the third, causing them to continue without interruption and preventing them from abandoning it. So sorry, just the third section within pure application related to others. So causing those who now are engaging in virtue to continue to do so without interruption and preventing them from abandoning it. So here, again, one is encouraging, one is guiding, so that others don't sit back on their laurels thinking, I've done enough, when they have the capacity to do more, and there is the need for more to be done.
Ane kunlong pe je du ki pe nyamlen che dumba shu tabu ande ane janju sem la so ba janju sem bi kunne la ba la kunlong ya bo che dene ge kunne la kunlong dene che dene kunlong dene che bi thone da na su su ke wa nyamlen che bi ka ble ya de shi che she sha sha ba ma yin ba che ya ne ya de gyun bu che da mu de che ya le ya ande ya be zhe che che nyamlen che de nyamlen wo su che dene nyamlen che che we che la ane su su ke wa di ya semja tamji de sanyu ko ba to yu chu do ngyo ngo wa che wo res de ne ngo wa che ba ina so su ge sa be ge wa di ge ane de pulu chu wa ni go chi mo cha go res sanyu ko ba to yu cha go re je da rang ge che ho ye de se da xian la de ba se de xian ji ge wa che ba ina de le ya chi su yi ran pe ya ya wo chi su yi ran che da xian ji ge wa che ba de le chi su yi ran che da ge wa che ma tu ba de ne yo ba ne ko su ya ge wa che ge ku ma che che so su ge wi konzu kewa cheyage tablam kane chiyogodo tabshit dajo konzu liya gewe nyamne jeju gore saji danda diresha.
Summarize these, the first two conditions, that of pure attitude and pure application. So in relation to oneself, first one establishes a motivation, and the ideal motivation is bodhicitta to the extent that we can develop it. And trying, especially through repeated cultivation, so that it arises within us in a way that is sincere and from the very depths of our heart. And to the extent that we do develop a sincere and intense motivation, then when we engage in the application or the actual virtuous activity, cultivating a mind of ethics or generosity and so forth, then we will be able to, that motivation will, the intensity and sincerity of our motivation will ensure that our application or performance is continuous and intensive. And then when it comes to dedicate, the strength of that motivation will continue through to our dedication, in that we'll dedicate in accordance with our motivation to the fulfillment of the Bodhisattva ideal, as well as with a sincerity and expressing this dedication from the depths of our hearts. So that, in brief, is the pure attitude and application in relation to oneself. And then the way to relate to others is when one sees them engaging in virtue, to sincerely rejoice. And in particular, if one notices a negative attitude such as jealousy or competitiveness or contentment, looking down that they're only doing such an ordinary activity, guard against this, and rather generate a rejoicing based in the bodhicitta one cultivates in one's motivation, recognizing that suffering beings are creating the causes for happiness. Whether those causes are small or great, they are creating causes for happiness, and thereby generate great joy. And to the extent that one has influence, encourage others to engage in virtue, to continue to engage in virtue, and to take up new virtuous activities.
Da xing daba sedi, yusumba xing daba sedi karasne, samjur dini jebu mangshin sangwa terwe na ani xingdu zhawa wos, zhawe sosa.
And over the page is the third condition, pure field. I've just added a word. This is simply that both attitude and application are like an excellent field in that they produce plenty of good fruit.
Samjur sedi samba kunlongi kunlota jawase ngwishi dede nyamne sedi ni dene ni jeje baina di debu khari yongosene dene ki debu mangbo yonga da debu sangbo yong yongorese jesa di debu mangbo de debu sangbo sedi di gyuti bene ngoi kunlong chanji semla so ba kunne shu da ba dene jawa di barma chi gyun yungbu che yodu di debu de la da ngang juge ngang juge kewa chima 원dio 고바 투비 귀야 제보야 약가소래 kewa chima 원dio 고바 톱투고 디텔라 엔디기데 덴바 용고래 엔델레 데네한 제 타비 고바 토바 용고래 데 진델레 데네 데니기 제보디 산요 고바 투비 귀차고로 봐 제자데 제보 상신 제보 망신 제보 망신 상화 용고래 데베나 데네 용고래 데자 데리아 신다 자와래 스가서 칭래 데네 돈도 망고 기고로 봐 데니사 삼주니 데 신다 자와자 개와 망고 용 기고요 봐자 데니사다 신 다바스라이드 김센디레스.
The reason then for this pure field is in reference to the incredible results that follow from following this guidance. If one does engage with a motivation or cultivate a motivation of bodhicitta, and in particular when one has some familiarity with that meditation, so that it arises from the depth of one's heart, that all one will do will be directed towards guiding others directly and indirectly to attain a state freed of suffering. Then with such a motivation, its application in virtuous endeavors will be continuous and intense because of the quality of one's motivation. And then when one comes to dedicate, it will not just be a mere recitation of words, but the words that one recites will be expressed with sincere meaning. So these aspects together will ensure that extensive merit is accrued, or one would say that plenty of good fruit will ripen. And plenty of good fruit refers to the varied ways the virtue that is, this powerful virtue that is accumulated will ripen. Because whilst it's dedicated to Buddhahood for all, it will indirectly ensure that you attain excellent rebirths, and that you will also eventually attain your own liberation from suffering, but not leave it at that. You will continue to become a Buddha so that you can be of the greatest benefit to others, and you will, all beings will too also become Buddhas, because that is the final goal to which all your merit is dedicated. This then is the meaning of a pure field.
오늘와 디나데 송단데라 디네 멤버제 당보 코로네 야 아니 모아디 마송 안데네 군노디 마송 데네 가서 뭐시 좋아 냠내체야디 송야디 송도와 디 송다디 디 송어디 디 데도 규숨세데 규숨 줍나 안에 겨풀로 쳐봐 중국에 세베게디 슝 현다치나라 송샤 유서와 디 슝나 송바 다가나지 디기 마제 셰캡제 제르미 송한자 슝 현다나 송야디 나라 안에 당보고 와디 송데네 안에 군노디니 바 조아디 디네 송디 유서와 다디디 다송에 식도와 디 슝지 나라 송요레 스페시시 나당에 디치디 페치데가 빈 파바 토메게 송에나 디네 페치 나라 슝지 나 규숨 유거디 셰 송요서와 디나라 가르송에 당보고 와디 송디네 군노디네 조아디게 두스요서와 디나시 림바 코론 슝 디나 송바 나지 림바 진마 송샤레 마도 장지 고림 추 송거 윤제 현다 유마 디네 시수도와 제사 정원에 지나 군노 당보시 디네 개회님네 조 문이 뭐시디 셰디네 타마 오아제디 송야디 고림 진네 디로시와 디나데 다디 디나 송야디 고림 당보고 와 송디네 군노 디네 타마 조아디 송야디 제단 디 디네 송고베 김제 가르스네 디 규숨나 데나 넘버 메고 풀루 중앙 중국에 세디 슝지 나라 송데요레 슝지나 니기 돈다 마시고레 제단 슝디 나라 송야들 당보다 오아디 오늘 예르 송 디네 디나 가서 군노데 디네 마 뭐시 좋아하는 냠네제 송데요와 디나신진의 거를 슝 게시 슝디 나네 여바나 시자지 디나신진 마 송와로데 디네 디서.
These three conditions then are a unusual ordering of a presentation we are quite used to. So what we're used to is more the order that is presented in great texts by masters such as the Sangha, where first the motivation is presented, then the performance or the actual activity, and then the dedication. Yeah, because it's been Lama Tsongkhapa himself has presented it in a slightly different way to bring the motivation and the dedication together in the pure attitude, and then separating the middle part, the performance, into the pure application or pure performance. But the meaning is the same as what you will have heard in the other contexts, in other contexts and in the normal sequence. The meaning is the same. But here, in that it relates to the preceding 8 causes to bring about 8 excellent results. This is how those 8 excellent causes can be amplified in terms of their ripening effect.
렌제 삼녀 주도 제바스 당도 기신이만이야 지 레제 지 삼바단 제라도 삼바 안에 안 주도 제소세 숨고라도 숨바 주도 제소세 제단 개벨에다 미개벨에서 되는데 디기 대부 안에 내미 대부 되는데 용거에서 된가서 루시네 다 내미 되는 용거에서 하다 루시네 주로와 다 주변자다 안에 레제의 냠소 랭고라도 주도 제바세디 다 저기 미개벨에 가서 주바스네 개위레디게 냠는 지야다 도바스데 미개위레기 파 도바 파 가야 되게 삼다 제사다 냠는 지야를 순거를 주도 지소.
So now we come to near the top of page 142, another major outline. So we've looked at a general presentation of karma thus far, an overview of the presentation on karma, looking at virtuous and non-virtuous karma, looking at how karma is magnified, as well as the karmic ripening results. So now we come to look in more detail at a presentation on what is beneficial and how to turn away from, or how to engage in what is beneficial and how to turn away from what is harmful.
장소로 세종도 제산다 지단이마 도수는 삼단이 미송다 지체 나 개발 믹스에다 되네 디바마 도야들이야 도시님부 도시 된제 바디바샤야기 도수레 디바샤는 개와도 보러와디 송거로.
So first we'll have a general presentation. Thereafter comes to a presentation on how to purify non-virtue by means of the 4 opponent powers.
And Nambo Nindigida di sungdwa dine junju nalya, junju les, mige wale dunga jung, dele jitara nge tarashi, ninsen dado dagi ni dini bashi sambari shedangs, gewi choni tamjegi zawa meba tubi sung, di yang zawa dado ni nemin jibu gombe so she sungba taras.
It starts with, a general presentation starts with Lama Tsongkhapa quoting from 2 verses from Shantideva's entering the Bodhisattva way. You've just made a change in the second line. Suffering arises from non-virtue. How can I definitely gain liberation from it? It is appropriate day and night always to contemplate nothing but this. The sage taught that resolute faith is the root of all virtues, and the root of that is to meditate continuously on fully ripened effects.
kiawa trebu kawa nyungo sene nga sol ma kie chine ani nga songe dunga pa do me ba nyungo re sa je nyungo re sa ti sung ro mi le ne dunga chung sa.
Suffering arises from non-virtue. So as we saw earlier, when looking at non-virtuous karma, when non-virtuous karma ripens, it ripens in suffering, and in particular, when it ripens, its fully ripened effect, or its propelling karma, it results in rebirth in the suffering lower realms. Suffering arises from non-virtue, so both suffering experiences in a rebirth, as well as the being reborn in the lower realms. This comes from non-virtuous karma, and depending on the strength of that ripening karmic imprint, determines on which lower realm one is born in, whether it's as an animal, a spirit, or in the hell realms.
Dushan samdang dang go da migele dunga jungse denege junggo re sepe denege dushan samdang dene samdang ne dene dang zu dunga midio ba inza dang zu dunga ta oda denege migo kene nyawa da jida dunro kene dunga pa me ba nyong go re sepe samdang de da dela da nyon da ma jigmi de che dunga dela ta go sepe denege dele jida nge tar changa denele ganes ta go re nen ta go do sepe da nge samdang go re so denege tarduge samba kanis tarduge delya jiginji mijo tawodo sempeda del mathan데 jigmido sempege nenege dele jida ngetarshi denege tawodo sembe samtane ninzen군도 ninzen dado dagin dilabashi sambarixide 제자 니나 챙기디네 denege le gunjal samtaje denege dele de mathan tabine de tawodo sembe samlo yane yado tangene ya nina 챙기디나 dene thone sam le gunjige samta dele tarduge samba geore esaji sungdo ninzen군도 dagi ni dangedi mathan에 tabino sembege dene zande dinye bashi samba dinyi bashi sedu le gunjige samlo da denege le dene chebani dene giudo dele ya samlo tangore es.
When we looked at the 10 non-virtues, as well as thereafter on propelling karma, we saw that the strength of the karmic imprint that ripens as propelling karma at death, the strength of that will determine where we are born. And if it's non-virtuous and it's powerful, one will be born in the hell realms. If it's of middling strength, one will be reborn as a spirit. And if it is of lesser strength or slight strength, that negative imprint will lead to rebirth as an animal. And born in these realms, one suffers in ways that are largely unimaginable to most humans. This then leads to the second line. How can I definitely gain liberation from it? Well, the way it's translated is fine too. But how can I definitely gain liberation from it? In other words, how can I close the door to the possibility of being reborn in the lower realms? So this question will arise independent on the meditation on karma, particularly the non-virtuous karma that can lead to rebirth in the suffering lower realms, which was the previous chapter or a previous chapter that was looked at. So this, having meditated well on these various topics, will lead to an intensity of mind. How can I prevent the possibility of falling into the lower realms? This then comes to the third and fourth line. It is appropriate day and night always to contemplate nothing but this. So this then, thinking about how one can gain freedom from such a rebirth, is something that should be a single concern for us, something that should occupy our minds, ensuring that we have the strength of mindfulness to be aware of our mind at all times, and thereby to protect ourselves from accruing non-virtue, and to ensure our mind is at all times virtuous. But to have such a strength of mind, to be so mindful, so aware of one's way of thinking, requires this meditation.
mani nga son la kene de pe sa sa re sembe da denigi semlia tele da tagu do sembe shu chenbo chi denigi le yo de nga zo ranshin yu ko da digbe che de digbe che ba mani ki go re sembe ki sam da chi nge ba shu nye yo de an digbe che de ranshin ga ru ko da digbe zao ge ji me sembe sam da denigi an di do sho le ge wa gang tu de ji gen du ye de da sam lo de le tu go ra che sa 만송이야 강아데 균시우 통에도 미디어밖에 될래 타르도가 섬 숙침보 게요도 라신이다 디바디다 지옥가고 지교 말했으면 디바샤야다 디바가 맞이 셈야라서 봐 얘네 디도쇼 개어주야디 라슈기 슈기레 두거와 현자데 계침보를 직까지 얘네기 균 다화디 계침을 차고와
If the attitude described here has yet to arise, this then shows one needs to meditate more on this, particularly if it has not yet arisen in a way that is lasting and sustained. Then you know you need to meditate more on cause and effect, because it's through meditating on cause and effect again and again, as well as what was looked at previously in the suffering of the lower realms, that determined attitude will arise. I have to ensure I gain liberation from the possibility of falling to the lower realms. This has to happen. And this intensity of mind will give will give you the focus required to always be aware of what one's mind is doing. This will come from the generated repulsion towards non-virtue. The very idea of engaging in something non-virtuous will repulse you because you know it doesn't come without consequence. Likewise, you will have given rise to an eager embrace of virtue. So these two minds will have arisen and give you the strength of mind to be mindful of your mental process and thereby ensure that one is engaging in virtue and not in a way that, we're doing it because I'm supposed to do it, but one does it with delight, with enthusiasm. And then when opportunities to engage in non-virtue come, one will readily refrain from that. It will be easy to refrain from non-virtue because of this repulsion towards it that you've cultivated by meditating well on cause and effect.
두시네 가서 다디 삼다디 소소라라 지당 안성기 동아 강아리에서 백균 통하지 맞아 가르삼도 나만이 나서를 계속 받아 나데네 동아 용고에도 뺏사사스 백이 다 소소라라기 데네 나만이 깨와 있는다 다 데네 동아 나디 냥투녀 투사 말와서 백이 삼다디 오다 나마 마예데 탑람데 지역도 삼백이 삼도리 두고래 데네자 디기 삼로디 야네야도 공고고레스 월당도 다 조르 냠네 지리갑라.
With meditation, it needs to be done in a way that's personal and specific to your lived experience, not merely a repetition of what one has read or heard. So, for example, in this context here, imagine oneself experiencing the karmic ripening result in the lower realms of non-virtue that you know you've performed. So you recall a non-virtuous deed, and then you meditate on what it would be like you yourself now, having died and being reborn in one of those suffering realms, imagining oneself experiencing the intense suffering which was the result of some misdeed that one has done. This then will lead to a deep impact on the mind and an ease with which one will turn away from non-virtue and embrace virtue.
Dine dunga le dine ge thaya ge samna chaya di des chunga dine ya chunga ne ya su samta. Chesa da dunro ge da ida dige da nyawa ida se denga su tonggo marse da di jungna pesna la ya songsha ba de. Da dunro ge dunga di yang zong so tonggo ba da pene semje jige nya la so ba de dine ge semje kana jimi suya da kanga je ya da pe du bu dang ye tonggo de dine ge ngo su tonglo ba da dine ge dang nga sung ge dunga le thar de ge 미지베 세바 미지베게 다제 삼로다 델레 타르게 삼로 슈셴보게 다 델레 마탄 타빈도 셈비게 삼로니 녜바 템보 니요디 데네 안에 코알이야 아제 달라다 밀게바나 동아요데 델레 타로 셈베 삼로 장이데 삼로 장이데 레라 용고레제 레라 용고레스 제가 디네 삼도데 디네 삼다이데 코웨 동아 타달레 타고도 셈비게 삼로디 장이 레라 용고 디네 장제 코웨 동아 타달레 라니 코웨 동아 타달레 타고도 셈베 삼로디 야고 기토바이나 데네 셈전 탐제 셈전 탐제 동아를 코비 동아를 저거 셈베 삼로디 야고 기토그리에서 셴 닝지고 미야디 야고 용고리에서 지자 당보 안에 나송의 동아를 타르게 삼바장 안 데네 기부 데 중국의 삼로자의 차그로 데네 코비 동아 타달레 라다미 그 차상계 동아 코비 동아 타달레 타르게 삼바장 디 야고 장이데 데네 닝지고 미야기 야고 리토그리에서 지자 데네 고면데 네 닝지고 미야 야불레 선디네 장슈sem기야다 타바침벨 람냠리 제알레 레라 용고로와 제자디네서 당보 호라네 나송의 동아를 로장야데 송고로와
The lived experience of those now suffering in the spirit realm or the hell realms, this is not something we can observe. If you have a deep faith in the existence of these realms, include them in your meditation. If you have some doubts because it's something that only the texts present, then that's okay. Don't include them in your meditation for now. Just meditate on the lived experience of animals, which we can experience. In particular, don't allow yourself to fall for seeing their cuteness, but recognize what their lived experience actually is like. How they do not have much in the way of support. Strangers, like in the human realm, there's a lot of support. Animals do not have this. And they are, moreover, a constant threat of danger, constant threat of being captured and eaten alive. And therefore, they are always nervous, apprehensive, because of the constant threat of danger. Reflect on this and reflect, what if it was me? What if this was my last meditation, my death were to be imminent, and what were to ripen was a negative, a non-virtuous karmic imprint, and that is the realm I was born in, and experience what it would, or meditate on what it would be like to arise as an animal. And in this way, by doing these meditations again and again, you'll give rise to that determined attitude, I do not want this to happen. And this is imperative, because it's all too easy to be drawn to other practices, such as meditating on emptiness or bodhicitta, and whilst these are excellent to do, to really give rise to these higher qualities, one has to have given rise to the foundational qualities. Because what the meditations in the training of a being of initial capacity, what they lead to is a turning away of things that in the greatest expanse of time have no real meaning. We turn away from the events of this life, the troubles that plague us and our world, and the various pleasures that dominate our minds so. We see them for what they are, as fleeting and having no value. And rather, we have a focused attitude, in this case, a focused attitude on what causes am I creating, and have an attitude towards purifying, cultivating an ever stronger virtuous motivation, and a genuine virtuous motivation. So this is how, right now, one turns towards the Dharma and away from all the other things that are just distraction. Then later, as we progress through the text, we come to the trainings where we start to look at the lived experience of humans, later then in terms of, so give rise to definite emergence, then bodhicitta much later on emptiness. because of the focused mind that you can develop right now through this, through applying yourself in what we're looking here, those later realizations can come to you in this life. Those later realizations can come to you because what is primarily holding one back is the strength of mind, the focus at all times on these various topics of the Dharma. And this is how we cultivate that focused attitude. To aid the cultivation, Lama Tsongkhapa quoted the second verse from entering the Bodhisattva way. The sage taught that resolute faith is the root of all virtues, and the root of that is to meditate continuously on fully ripened effects.
Mabada Dumbada Mabakuris, Chesa Dumke, Gawadi Yamlan Cheg, Dumbada Delia, Gabu, Yamlet Yapor, Dicho, Sempigita, Gabu Yobina, Maba Yobina, and Yamlan Chigis, that Mabada Yamlan Cheg, Maba the Dumba Mena, Yamlan Chig Marwa, Jesa gave you Chokarina, Yamle Yapo Chegi, Zawadi Garsene, gave Tigi, Yamlan Chelia, Deva Dunyer, Dumbatang, Delia, Gaway Yamche, Maba, Gabuki, the rest our rest in and to be soon to Basan German ticket in somewhere.
Look, in the first two lines, the sage taught that resolute faith is the root of all virtues. So this word translated as resolute faith can be translated in many ways. This is correct, but depending what works for you, a deep aspiration, a heartfelt belief. So this is what the Buddha taught is the root of all virtues. So whatever virtuous endeavor one is engaging in, one needs to have a deep aspiration to cultivate it, or a deep belief in the benefits of cultivating it, or resolute faith in that virtuous quality. This is the root of all virtues.
And the Zawa Dadoni city, the Merba Digis, giving Yamlin Cheg, Dumbata, Merba Jea, Di Zawadi, then Denigi, and the Lake Gundig, Tongi, Lake Gunelia, Tony, Yichip, Devadres, or the D Zawa Dadoni is Gidina, Denigi, Zawadi, and the Lake Gawal Chip, Migawa Chebal, Chebutini, Young Yore said to Sheba Shimjin, Taiwan, Rea, Sambe Yicheva. Devachara, then when it did Resha, Sampe, Nichiba Leo do, that gay Nason Tala, Dipa the Bangudo, Dimabana, Gulatin, Nason Gido, Dumatin, Yongudo, Asepe, Sebuja, Hagodo, that didn't Lele Yichevas or Yicheva Deva said, that data is Reseva, that Devas or Landela Teche Devas. Chessan di Tata DJ Simpita, Gawa. Migawa Chebaina, and the Tiba didn't Yongu in Yongu, Gawa Cheban didn't Chebudunga taking the Yongu, Tata Resbe, the Negi, the Deva, the Yobana, the Timbu Yaho Chobana, Simjuja Yaho, Hagon, Timbu Chobana, then Gawan Yamne, Dunya, Dumbati Gigres, Dumbati Gigre, Dumbashu Chamber, the Melba, the Dumbaki, and giving him the code, Casso Yamne Chigres or that.
When we hear the Buddha taught that resolute faith is the root of all virtues, because we all have faith in the Buddha, we will want to give rise to resolute faith. How to do so? And Shantideva presents it in the next two lines. And the root of that, so in how to give rise to resolute faith, is to meditate continuously on fully ripened effects. In other words, on the presentation on karma, on cause and effect. Because it's through understanding that everything we experience is a ripening result. Our own lived experience, this world we live in, this has come from causes that have been created. And if we think of the person we want to be, the kind of world we want to live in, this comes from causes. Thinking about this again and again, recognizing where we are as a result of causes, and thereby understanding that what we'd rather have, where we'd rather be, that too is a result of causes. This gives rise to a confident faith or a resolute faith in the presentation on cause and effect. recognizing that merely hoping for something, or not liking something or wanting something else, isn't going to bring change. Causes need to be cultivated, and the quality of the cause is what determines the quality of that result. That one doesn't merely need to turn away from non-virtue and embrace virtue, one needs to do so wholeheartedly, with one's full attention, with one's very being. One needs to abandon non-virtue with a sense of repulsion and embrace wholeheartedly virtue. But for that to come about, to live that life, to be that kind of person, requires meditating continuously on cause and effect.
Nimin jibu kumbeso, jeza de le gyunje le yi chepike, deba redwa simpe ngeba nye dele ha, nimin jibu, ane dusu gyumse samda, gomba se da, jeba janga zu jegom sungore, jogom sungore, ma jegom sungore. Jeza da, yudine san jibu, dinde yungdo ati ben pechinal son yung dige, pa lo, tue samje, tue baje, dine range sam du chine, sam tang yidu, gyumse sam da du sin yane, sam tang yidu, dine ki nimin jibu, gomba se de, Yutela den nemin jubu den kiudo den kiudo kiwi gumsen kare jeba ne den kare yorse duchen simju jeba je duchen ne ane jeba je sam dang yudu ane di muini su de da hore den de redo asen pe kigire so da den de di redo asen pe sam kiudo den an dele da di bango do se be dele ye matan da tabmen se be de bandu ge samba da ngewe nyemle jeba yungure ese sin nemin jubu kombe so se de jesan gewe migewe nemin jubu Gomba so the yane and jeba jehum jes.
When you come across the term here meditate, the type of meditation that is almost always referred to is analytical meditation. Or to use just everyday language, it's thinking, but thinking based on reasons, not the mind wandering all over the show, but thinking based on reasons. Coming to understand a particular topic, and then thinking about that in a detailed manner. So in terms on the presentation on karma, read and reread the text, paragraph by paragraph. Read the notes you have on that, paragraph by paragraph. And as you read, keep pausing and reflecting on what you are reading, and do so in a personal manner, in relation to oneself, one's own lived experience. In this way, one keeps reading the same parts again and again, making them the meaning clear and vivid to oneself. By comparing what kind of life we can expect based upon the actions of this life up to this point, we will gain a determined motivation to improve, to change the trajectory of our future lives by taking hold of the Dharma now, embracing it within us, recognizing that this is what will lead to a transformation of our lives to come. In this way, we'll give rise to a resolute faith in the presentation on karma. We will naturally aspire to virtue. Because what we are trying to give rise to here in this presentation is not just an intellectual understanding, but a deep determination to embrace virtue and to abandon non-virtue. And when these meditations are done repeatedly over a sustained period, that will be the natural expression of who you are. To act in a harmful manner, to speak in a harmful manner, to think in a harmful manner. You'll feel an aversion towards that. It won't feel like who you want to be. Whereas being a generous person, a kind person, a loving person, this will be a genuine reflection of who you are becoming. So therefore, this meditation on cause and effect, doing so in the way described, is indispensable.
Anda dini ma she sungpa taras nimin jibu gomba osegi dunda di she sungpa taras karna ki lede shebara chene yanda yandu gombar che des. Chisanda karbi le sede nga zuki kewe le dirwa kewal sabala tene le jibu sa le kewa sabana jibu ngondio koban tende le ya digyon yoyada. Tene kewa sabala tene tarbi koban toyada tamje kimbo koban toba duchine ni kewa sabala tene yungore sebegida karbi le da. 다 나베 레시도 다 미기베 레라 테네 ngason ke da ngason ke dunga da tene yung gore se be tene ki karna ke 레제 셰버체네 두 셰버체 심주체 하고와체 셰버체네 야네 야도 공바제스 다 렌제데 하고와 점이 지금 말이 야네 야도 삼마다베나 지 어디에서 차지 하고네 지금 아니 내가 때문에 두고 말이 제가 야네 야도 삼당고리에서 야네 야도 삼다베나 근데 삼로디 슈체체네 네 개वे님네 저 슈체다 녀모 그래서 디버 포인트야 아니 제 슈체 용 그래서 제가 간나게 레제 셰버체네에서 юм센 되게 삼다 제바지 하고와지 되나 하고와 맛이 되네 야네 야도 삼당고 공부해서 삼 제바지 오래서
Then Lama Tsongkhapa continues. So once you have come to understand virtuous and non-virtuous actions and their effects, you should meditate on this over and over again. So this sentence is something that you have heard so many times. Gather knowledge and integrate it. And the way to integrate it is through this process of repetition, meditating on the same topic again and again so that it becomes integrated within you, becomes part of who you are. And the sign of gaining success in this particular meditation is that when your faith arises, in the sense that your mind becomes so accustomed to contemplating on karma, that all that arises for you, you will relate to through the lens of this understanding. Everything that you experience, you will recognize this is coming about in dependence on causes. And that understanding will shift you ever more towards embracing virtue and abandoning non-virtue. This will come through when you understand that it's virtuous causes that will lead to liberation. And what are those virtuous causes? And in fact, those virtuous causes can lead to enlightenment too, in dependence on the right motivation. And it's only non-virtuous causes that keep me bound in suffering and prevent me from fulfilling my potential. So by thinking in these ways again and again, so that you start to experience all that, so that everything that you experience, you relate to through the lens of karma, then you are giving rise to resolute faith.
신도 고교 안줄이야 안안도 볼라 신도 고교에서 bên nhà 요래 세다 간설에 둥 bên nhà cái đời cái 세다 안주기 통투고 말이 안주 내 담보 왔다 볼라 그래서 신도 고교래 지단 신도 고교 말에 그 고교래 그 신도 고교 중세 고교서 용어로 제자다 중세 고교 김제 삼단에 하고 되게 고교 균세 삼단 사모가 룽코나를 했더니 하고 가야 되라 신도 고교식으로 제자다 지담이 저기 리비 냠를 제바 제간다 셰 또스 검시 장도 요간 저기 여바 있나 되니게 간선 것을 디범미가 wal제발에 간선 기그래서 김전 삼다는 하고 두바 용고를 중세 고교 차고래 신도 고교 차고 말 양아연서 레 당보 양아연서 레 되니게 리비 장도 매한다 되니게 신도 고교로 차죠 that's 룽코나리아 상기가 소마들 다가라 이치체는 마도 나도 내가 필요하고 그거 말 제가 다 신도 고교를 세대 나라도 다볼라 레당보 왔다고 거기서 신도 고교 차도요 해서 되어 개와치망을 동하다 예외 동하셔야 되게 되네 동안 용어 받아 되네게 개와치마데 개와사발라 되네 다다 미고 토그레셔야 돼 나라도라 레당보를 신도 고교 차 진짜 상기 룽데 송바들 이치체기를 해서 이치체고를 해서 그러다 상이 개와 사바이나 나손에 타게 하다미고 토그레서야다 디버체바이나 나손에 기그레 되네 지금을 동안 용거를 손한테 상이 손한테 받 다가라다 이시지고래 제고래서 이시지고래서 마도 만줄의 신도 녀바 신도 가발 인자 등한 쪽에 하고 깔래 하고를 해서 녀바 체녀바 가위죠 만줄이야 하고 해야 됩니다 득배 깔래 하고 차도요 대자다 되네 임바디 롱래 이시지기를 해서 제고래서
Then Lama Tsongkhapa presents reasoning why it's imperative that we meditate on this topic again and again, because it is extremely difficult to gain certainty about it, since it is very hidden. So phenomena are of three types. There are those which we can be known manifestly, the things that we see and hear and taste and so forth. There are things that are hidden, but can come to be known by ordinary beings through reasoning. And there are those which are very, very hidden or extremely hidden, which for ordinary beings cannot be known. And the deeper presentation on karma is very hidden. It cannot be known by ordinary beings. We can only come to an understanding, independence on our faith or trust in the Buddha, and thereby in dependence on the Buddha's teachings. And this is because, so on a coarser level, in terms of cause and effect, we can come to an understanding. But in terms of a deeper level, what is the particular cause for that result? That we can only come to know independence on our faith in the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings. And there are many topics that are either hidden and some which are very hidden. But there are some topics that for us as ordinary beings right now and for some time will remain very hidden, but eventually will become only hidden. In other words, we can eventually come to know. So for example, the only realms we can really point to with certainty that are manifest to us are the human and animal realms. The other realms for us are hidden. But by cultivating our minds, developing knowledge, through reasoning we can come to recognize that there are other realms, the realms of spirits and hell beings, as well as the realms of gods. So these can come to be known. But other presentations, such as that on the subtleties of karma, this is something only Buddhas will know. So therefore, to gain certainty of this presentation is difficult and requires extensive meditation.
Na donda la dadengan juge kewa chima ngso da ji si sa de dunga sa de da so so ha mo go ne sang yi sun ju lung de le yi chi che ne du che ne so so ge da sim ju che nyam che ba che du che ne de ne ba jiang de che ne lu xiang go le de jiang de che le ne le yun de ge de ha go le de ne ha go de ne an de le ya an ji ge je de ne ge nga so dunga pang go dunga sa nyomo nga so ge dunga gyu ti pa pang go do ge wa nyam le je wo sen be de ni yu ba le ge de ni ba le yo du an ne nga ju ge da ji ge ge we nyam le je ya da ti po pong wa ja wa le ju ge les an do shen je wo le sa dan da de song do.
The meaning then in brief is independence on meditating, using analytical meditation again and again, so using reasoning and our own lived experience on the teachings of the Buddha on this topic of karma. Eventually resolute faith in this presentation will come. And this will be experienced by us as, firstly, how we are experiencing things. We'll recognize that this is coming about independence on causes that have been created. But more importantly, from that, we will come to, with ease, turn away from what is non-virtuous. We'll have a revulsion to what we understand as non-virtuous. And equally, we'll have an eagerness and embracing of what is virtuous. And we'll see that there is nothing more important than this, abandoning what is non-virtuous and embracing what is virtuous. And in this way, we'll readily let go of all the things that consume us so, but that actually have no real value.
Da donda la ngan ju ge de xue de ge da donda ngan ju ge kewa chima ine ya an di gi tu ya da tar ba da tham ji kim be ko ba to ko yin za ji ne za da ngan ju kewa nyam len che de ya gar ko bo se ne ku no le ya nyam len che du gi da yin ge we ge wa tu de da dunga pa de ge sam lo ti an do shi na ge ti ge sam lo ta le gyun de ge de ne sam ta ne de ne ngan ju kewa ndu yo de ka lo ku no le ya ane 지게 심장 시 심장에 판도 편배치 심장 탐지 산교 고방 토발라 토고도 뒤에서 개변념을 제베 띵켜바체 토고를 샘비게 삼다제 디토네 군원디네 야고지된 데리아 안념는 제도기 듬바탕 매바 숙심보게 안데니체 안디토네 아소수게 개와카를 두비네다 진배년다 대신소야 된거 망아지 진배년래나 쇠배년래 안에 지게 어두신 수림소야 되게 도시야 보송 되네 냠내제 되네 냠내제네 제리야 냠내제 세베다 가지고 니메레 제베나라 주제지까지 기디 제베나 된 잠샤비 바라들다 잠샤도 난 되네게 개와디야 오와죠 semja tamji gyudun sanyi rang jigbi dunda digi yuwa da 세령고야 삼마다와제 semja 탐지기도나 산지고 본토비 귤귤와쇼 세비게다 도시는 오아자고래세제 되네기 군노다 냠내지야다 오아자데 도시는 도나닝보디 디스무도와데 디리도와 지사 이제 되네기 냠내지고래세 도나닝보디 다 디리샤 지사다 진비 냠내 추제 냠내 진비 냠내들라 사징이 진바다 치기 진바라 소바요와 어디네기 제바이나 아주 개와 치마야고야다 안디티로와 되네 소비냠내지야 아니지 도시네 수림소야 되게 도시냠내지 오래스 되네지네 안디 냠내지 개와 군노데 자주sem다 이 군야나다 되네 냠내지야디 dim바트와 베제치 냠내지에서는 소수게다 게디 냠내지야 잠샤야 파라들이야 잠샤야도 탐마들이야 개와디파 sem자 탐지산 요고 모토도 모아지 오래스 랑게 개와디네 줍다 현기 개와 주야들이야 미생이 주 개와도 주바자 하고 통화다 퇴발라서 버지네 배야보래서 미치수 이랑곰 안지수 이랑곰이다 랑게 기회념네 지바 맞이 랑게다 뉴베 강조게 현리야 기회념네 제발이야 배 가서래 그 꾸마제시 현 개발이야 기회념네 제알이야 엠베즈치 오래서 언도나 들디레도 당도 디링게 가산다 되는 걸 없산지게다 디네트 소냥한 쪽에 강한 투두기 수수기 냠내 제야디 디네레샤스데 디리도 되는 뭐.
So let's summarize, and it will be a little while until we come together again. So what I encourage you to meditate on is what we covered here this weekend, and to do so repeatedly over a sustained period in the way that has been presented. Because what has been presented here is the very causes that are required in order to ensure that one eventually becomes a Buddha. And not only eventually becomes a Buddha, but in that journey, one will also gain complete freedom from suffering entirely. And in fact, long before that, one will receive many excellent rebirths, excellent rebirth after excellent rebirth. In all of this, as has been presented again this weekend, comes about independence on accumulating virtue and abandoning non-virtue. These are the causes that lead to those desired results. And we saw in particular today the need to cultivate first the required motivation. And here the motivation to cultivate is a genuine wish to be of benefit to others and to refrain from harming them in any way. So refraining from harming them in terms of our physical or verbal activities, and even refraining our mind from going in a harmful direction. But in terms of benefiting others, we have as our desired goal to benefit others in the most meaningful of ways, to guide them in every way possible to become Buddhas themselves. But in order to be able to do that, we also commit to helping others to ease their suffering and be of benefit to them in temporary ways. Because helping in ways which may seem insignificant, but with this motivation of wanting thereby to eventually lead them to Buddhahood, this becomes an incredibly powerful virtuous act. So cultivate this motivation of wanting to benefit others in the most meaningful of ways and the determination not to cause harm. Then engage in, that's the motivation. Then the actual performance or the actual practice. And here there are a number of meditations. You can meditate on each briefly or focus on one or two. So you can meditate on generosity. And we heard in the earlier presentation on the causes for those 8 excellent results, how generosity is pervasive throughout many of them. There's the material generosity, there's the generosity of giving of fearlessness, and the generosity of giving of the Dharma. So cultivate these within you. Imagine in the ways that you've been taught over these years, the various ways to meditate on generosity, to give of oneself in any way in accordance with one's capacity, and where one's capacity is limited, to have the genuine aspiration for one's capacity to grow and develop. Thereafter, one can meditate on ethics, the determined attitude not to harm others, to recognizing that responding in harm is never appropriate, and develop this determined attitude, thinking of events in one's life, past, as well as what one will face, how best to respond in an ethical manner, how to ensure that no matter what one encounters, one does not cause harm. And likewise, and thereafter, one can meditate on love and compassion, which is an excellent foundation to meditate on patience, the determined attitude not to cause harm, because the determined attitude for one's mind not to be disturbed in the face of adversity. So this attitude of patience is greatly aided by ethics, the wish not to harm others, and generosity, the wish to be of benefit to others, as well as by love and compassion, valuing others, wanting them to be happy. And then one also meditates on enthusiastic perseverance, taking delight in what one is doing, taking pleasure in this. And then there were additional practices mentioned. Particularly, I want to remind you of rejoicing. Rejoicing in the good that others do. And here I encourage you to think of actual instances from people that you know, or that you know directly, or perhaps through media, of good that others are doing in this world. And thereby, guard your mind of looking down on others, thinking, oh, that's a minor thing they are doing, or of being competitive of others or jealous of others. Generate this good quality of delighting in the virtue that others are engaging in. And then finally, dedicate. And the dedication should be an expression of one's motivation. And where it is, then you should see that one's motivation isn't just cultivated at the beginning, but is kept alive and present throughout the performance, the main body of the meditation, and then is expressed again in dedication. Dedicate this merit so that all beings gain complete freedom from suffering and attain complete Buddhahood. Then thank you. We can conclude therefore for this weekend. Thank you very much.
So dedications are on page 8.
Okay, do you have time? Sorry, we take a question? Yeah.
I just was interested in the hidden phenomena of Dharma, and how we relate that to people who have no background in Dharma. How do we refer to it? Perhaps we can only say it is said in Buddha Dharma. Because it's not apparent to us, and other people will ask us questions, may ask us questions about it.
So this is the extremely hidden things that we can't come to know through logical reason, yeah?
And we are operating on faith ourselves. Yeah. Then how do we relate that to others who have no such practice?
Sure.
Sangile deva meza sangyu sungore lungle sungore te di she askayo mara di she na pando she askayo mara dan di yebigi da sosorana ge de jiko koron mana jugi muini su de timbi ragwa ruchi samda je ragwa ruchi besun ji she de wa dan ene jugi gewa chebe ina gewa chebe ina ane debu ne ya jungures bena jugi samba sangbu ji je beni Shen Semje Chilia, Kalate, Jambu Chebaina, Di Dibuli, Semjen Diki, Anzulia, Kavuchi Duas, Net Gutilatine, Socio Kavu Chebaina, Sul Kavucha, Yunguas, Dimos Noirua, Bene Kiro, China, Kalate, and the Dinjeliak, Ton and the Jew, Yungurua, and the millionaire, Paya, what you call Kamate, Roboche to Spando Tuvina, and the Gasore, Chelia, Collier, Gangase to Gore, and the Collier Sim Kiwon, the young thing Pandochi, Devoris. She's not the lake Gunde said, and the lake Gunde said, Guda, Leda, Gudita, Gundil, she got some little tone, Pembe, some Tavadi, Gukawa said Lagore, and the penny Pandia did Devos Chagro, the lake Gunde said. Jidan unity was a seventh of the Gundelua, Lake Gundes, some little on the some little you had the Niki Lake Gundesigoras, dinner because Geshe Thubten Rabten wants to be how to a Lelo Chagua.
as you say, the way to reply needs to be in accordance with this person. So quoting to them sayings of the Buddha, this isn't going to be appropriate for such a person. So rather, try to give examples that they can relate to. So in terms of a very hidden phenomenon, we'll take that of karma, the current topic. So if someone is looking for explanation of karma, then you talk about a cause and effect from the mental approach and the mental causes and mental results, or results that are experienced mentally, from a one-life perspective. Because this is something then anyone can relate to. So you can give an illustration of if you have some leftover food and you give it to a hungry dog. And you do that with a joyous mind, happy to be helping this dog. So you have a good motivation. You will experience far more happiness yourself from the delight the dog takes in what it's taking. Whereas if you just discard the food with no real particular mental engagement, the dog's just as happy, the hungry dog is just as happy, but the result that comes back to you isn't quite the same, because you're not taking so much pleasure in easing the suffering of another being. So here, you relating, so normally when we talk about karma, we're talking about causes created now leading to future lives. This won't work with such a person, like you rightly said. So talk about your own mental attitude and the way you will experience pleasure from engaging in virtue. Then this is something that they can relate to.